If these words are reaching you now, it is not because an algorithm decided it. At least, that is not the deepest truth. Something in you has been circling this moment for a long time, like a bird that knows the outline of a hidden shore it has never seen. You may have clicked on a video, opened a link, pressed play, almost absent-mindedly. Yet beneath that small action, the unconscious has been arranging its own quiet convergence. Jung called such moments synchronicity, not mere coincidence, but a meaningful alignment between your inner state and an outer event, as if the psyche itself were saying, "Look here. This is for you." You may already feel it in your body, a slight tightening in your chest, a sense of being unusually awake, as if the air around you is thickened by a degree. There is nothing spectacular happening in the room, and yet a subtle trembling begins inside. This is how true inner turning points announce themselves, not with fireworks, but with an almost inaudible shift in the atmosphere of your being. For a long time, you have been faithfully playing your role, living inside the persona, the social mask Jung described as the version of ourselves we craft to survive, to belong, to be acceptable. The persona is not evil. It is necessary. But there comes a moment when its seams begin to split. The first cracks in the persona rarely appear as grand epiphanies. They enter through the side door of your life. A sentence in a book you almost didn't open seems to address you by name. An old song follows you from supermarket to car to cafe, carrying a message you can't quite decipher but feel in your bones. A stranger's offhand remark lodges in your chest and refuses to move. From the outside, it looks like nothing. But inwardly, the architecture of your meanings is beginning to rearrange itself. The unconscious, which Jung saw not as a chaotic basement, but as a living, intelligent field, has started to speak more loudly. Perhaps you have noticed that what used to soothe you no longer works. The same routines, the same distractions, the same consolations you once used to keep yourself going now feel oddly hollow. Your evenings stretch longer. Sleep comes later. There are more moments when you find yourself staring at a wall or out a window, feeling a pressure for which you have no words. This pressure is the psyche's way of saying, the way you have been living is too small for who you are becoming. Individuation. The Jungian term for the process of becoming the person you truly are in your depths often begins not with inspiration, but with discomfort. A kind of low, steady ache that refuses to be anesthetized. Your body is often the first to register that something is shifting. You might find yourself unusually sensitive to sound or light, feeling the weight of the day more acutely in your muscles. Colors seem sharper. Ordinary moments take on an uncanny vividness, like scenes in a film where you sense that something important is about to happen, though you don't yet know what. This is the psyche extending its antennae, scanning both the inner and outer world for symbols that can carry the magnitude of what wants to be born. What you call a strange feeling, depth psychology recognizes as the self, the deeper organizing center of the psyche, beginning to stir beneath the life you have constructed around it. On the surface, your life may still look functional, even successful. You show up. You perform. You say the right words in the right rooms. No one around you would suspect that anything is changing. And yet in the quiet corridors of your inner world, the furniture is being moved. Conversations that once felt nourishing now leave a bitter aftertaste. The laughter you share feels slightly out of sync with what you actually feel. It is as if you are watching yourself from a slight distance, playing a part you used to inhabit more convincingly. This dissonance is not a failure. It is the first hint that your soul is no longer willing to be entirely hidden behind your costume. The equilibrium you once maintained between external adaptation and inner truth is dissolving, and a threshold is slowly, inexorably appearing before you. The threshold rarely arrives with a signpost. It appears instead as a subtle unraveling, a quiet refusal of the psyche to keep participating in its old choreography. One evening, you may find yourself sitting alone, realizing with a kind of stunned clarity that you have been living inside a life that no longer fits. The conversations you have rehearsed, the roles you have mastered, the identity you have worn so faithfully, all of it begins to feel strangely transparent, like thin fabric held up to the light. This is the moment when the unconscious begins to seep through the cracks, asserting its presence with increasing insistence. Jung wrote that the unconscious does not speak in arguments, but in symptoms, images, and dreams. And those dreams may now grow sharper. A forgotten room, an unfamiliar child, a wild animal that watches you from the edge of a forest. These dream figures are not random. They are emissaries from a deeper layer of your psyche, signaling that the time of hiding is ending. You may not know when the shift began, only that you can no longer unknow it. Something is calling you inward. Something is telling you to withdraw from the noise, from the conversations that flatten your spirit, from the obligations that drain more than they give. This withdrawal is not depression, though it may resemble it. It is not laziness, though others may accuse you of it. It is the psyche preparing for descent. Jung understood that any authentic transformation requires a liminal period, a suspension of old structures, a gathering of inner resources, a quieting of the surface so that deeper forces may emerge. This is the space between what was and what will be, the psychic twilight, where the old identity dissolves and the new one has not yet taken form. At first, this liminality feels like confusion. You stand in your kitchen or lie awake in your bed and sense that something momentous is shifting beneath the ordinary rhythm of your days. But you cannot name it. You cannot explain it. You sense only an inner restlessness, a longing that seems directionless, a hunger you cannot satisfy with food or achievements or reassurance. This longing is the call of the self, an ancient organizing intelligence at the center of your psyche, drawing you toward a more truthful life. But the self does not call you upward at first. It calls you downward toward the roots of your being, into the shadowed forests of the unconscious, where your forgotten truths and exiled instincts lie sleeping. Withdrawal is the first step, but it is not the end. Soon, you will notice that the outer world begins to feel strangely distant, as if you have stepped behind a pane of glass. You move through your days with a faint sense of detachment, like someone studying her own existence from a vantage point just slightly removed. This is not dissociation, but the early stage of psychological disidentification, an unwinding of the tight knots that bound your ego to an identity that served you once but has grown too narrow. You begin to witness yourself objectively, the polite laugh that conceals irritation, the careful nodding that hides your boredom, the enthusiasm you manufacture to avoid disappointing someone. You see it all with a clarity that startles you. This is the persona beginning to loosen the mask, sliding minutely aside, revealing the living face beneath. Around this time, synchronicities may intensify. Books fall open to the very sentence that describes your internal state. You overhear fragments of conversations that echo your private thoughts. You encounter symbols, birds, numbers, faces, songs that arrive with a resonance too coherent to be dismissed. It is as if the outer world has begun speaking in your private dialect. Jung insisted that synchronicity appears when the unconscious is pushing toward consciousness, when the psyche is preparing for a decisive shift. These moments are not magic tricks. They are the alignment of two realities, the visible one in front of you and the invisible one stirring inside. And then, without fanfare, the descent begins. Not a fall, but a slow, sinking, a gravitational pull toward the depths of your own psyche. The underworld is not a place of punishment, but a realm of truth, where the forgotten, the shamed, the forbidden, and the unlived lie waiting. Every authentic transformation requires this journey. Every homecoming demands it, because what lies below the surface of consciousness is not darkness alone, but the very material from which your true life must be built. You are entering the territory where myth and psyche mirror one another, the symbolic underworld that countless heroes and heroines have walked in story and dream. But unlike stories, this descent is not chosen. It is compelled by the self, by the deeper intelligence that insists you must recover what was lost if you are ever to become whole. The descent begins subtly, but soon its momentum becomes unmistakable. There comes a morning when you wake with the sense that some invisible weight has settled over your chest. Not a sadness, exactly something older, more primordial. A feeling like the earth itself is asking you to slow down, to sink, to listen. This is the gravity of the underworld pulling you inward. Jung called this movement the nekia, a journey into the depths where the unconscious reveals its hidden contents. It is not a metaphor only, it is an experience felt in the body. Your limbs may feel heavier, your breath may tighten, the world may appear flatter, less compelling, as if its colors have dimmed. This dullness is not a failing. It is the psyche withdrawing its libido, its life energy from the roles and structures that can no longer contain your becoming. During this descent, your dreams grow vivid, sometimes unsettling. You may dream of dark waters, collapsed houses, abandoned places, or encounters with figures who feel both foreign and intimately known. These images are not random. They are symbolic enactments of your inner landscape. Jung observed that the unconscious uses images to compensate for the ego's narrow vision. When you have ignored truths for too long, your anger, ambition, sensuality, grief instinct, those truths rise as dream figures to demand recognition. They knock on the door of your consciousness with increasing urgency, insisting that the parts of yourself you exiled must now be reclaimed. In waking life, you may begin to lose interest in things that once defined you. Friendships that anchored you suddenly feel porous, unable to hold the weight of who you are becoming. You feel a growing impatience with shallow conversations, with performative politeness, with the small rituals of self-abandonment you once accepted without question. This is not bitterness. It is the early emergence of discernment, a sign that the ego is beginning to attune to the deeper rhythm of the self. As the light of consciousness descends into the shadow, it illuminates the places where you have betrayed your inner truth. And this clarity, though painful, is profoundly sacred. The shadow itself now approaches. Jung described the shadow as the sum of all we deny, repress, or refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. But it is not limited to what is negative or shameful. The shadow contains power, vitality, intuition, sexuality, creativity, and the fierce instincts you suppress to be accepted. To meet the shadow is to encounter the full spectrum of your denied life. You may experience bursts of anger that startle you, a longing that feels too large, an ambition you once disowned because it seemed dangerous or unfeminine. These eruptions are not regressions. They are the psyche returning what rightfully belongs to you. At first, the shadow may appear in projection. You may find yourself suddenly irritated by people who express qualities you secretly yearn to embody. The outspoken woman triggers your buried voice. The passionate woman evokes your denied desire. The ambitious woman reflects the fire you once extinguished to appear modest. Jung taught that projection is the first stage of shadow integration. What we see in others is often what we cannot yet face in ourselves. As you descend further, the boundary thins. You begin to recognize that what disturbs you in others is a compass pointing toward your own unlived life. This confrontation can be frightening. You may feel as if you are unraveling, as if something inside you is breaking open, but nothing essential is being destroyed. What is collapsing are the inner structures that kept your truth contained. The psyche breaks down what is outdated so that something new and ancient can rise in its place. In myth, every descent requires a shedding. The heroine must surrender her old garments, her old identity, her old attachments. Psychologically, this shedding is experienced as vulnerability, confusion, emotional turbulence. Yet beneath the turbulence lies a profound recalibration. The deeper you go, the stronger the quiet pulse of your authentic self becomes. And then, unexpectedly, the descent reveals something more than shadow. Beneath the personal unconscious lies the collective unconscious, the layer of psyche shared by all humanity, filled with archetypal patterns and ancestral memories. Here, you may feel sudden surges of grief that seem older than your own life, as if you are grieving not only for yourself, but for the women before you, who also silenced their desires to survive. You may feel currents of anger or longing that have no clear origin in your personal history. These experiences can be disorienting, yet Jung insisted that such effects signal an encounter with the archetypal realm. You are touching the deep feminine lineage, the transgenerational patterns that shaped your mother, your grandmother, and the women before them. In this underworld, you are not alone. You walk among the psychic remnants of your ancestry, feeling their unresolved stories, their unfinished initiations, their muted cries. And perhaps for the first time, you sense that your transformation is not only personal, it is part of a larger healing, a movement that stretches backward through time and forward into the lives of women yet to come. The underworld is not only a descent into your wounds, it is an encounter with the collective psyche, a confrontation with the forces that shaped your very being. As you move deeper into this psychic underworld, another presence begins to take shape, quieter but fiercer in its implications. It is the imprint of the father complex woven like a subterranean thread through your relationships, ambitions, failures, and self-evaluations. Jung used the term complex to describe emotionally charged clusters of memories and associations that operate autonomously within the psyche, shaping behavior without conscious intention. The father complex, in particular, often governs a woman's instinctual relationship to authority, self-worth, ambition, and the masculine dimension of her own psyche. You may begin to sense how much of your striving, your perfectionism, your hunger for praise, your need to be seen as good, reliable, pleasing was not born from the self, but from an internalized desire to win approval from a father, literal or symbolic, whose gaze shaped your earliest understanding of value. It is here that the descent becomes more intimate. You begin to see how many decisions in your life were subtle negotiations with an internal figure, a voice embodied not only by your father, but by teachers, bosses, partners, institutions, anywhere the archetype of the paternal law resides. The father complex is not simply a relationship with a parent. It is a relationship with the entire architecture of validation that society has woven around you. You start to realize that the authority you have been seeking outside yourself has long overshadowed the authority rising from within. And this recognition is both liberating and devastating, because to withdraw your energy from the internalized father is to dismantle the scaffolding that supported you for years. It is to admit that much of your self-discipline, your restraint, your relentless self-monitoring was shaped by a need to be worthy in the eyes of an invisible judge. A subtle anger may rise here, an ancient simmering fire that you once suppressed to remain acceptable. Women are often taught to soften their edges, to smile, pass the insult, to nod politely through the violation of their boundaries. But now, in the depth of the unconscious, the truth awakens. The anger you feel is not a destructive force. It is the energy of your sovereignty returning. Jung insisted that reclaiming the shadow inevitably brings with it the resurgence of instinct, of fire, of eros, the raw life force that animates desire, creativity, and vitality. As this fire returns, something astonishing happens. Your internal authority begins to eclipse all external ones. The voice within you, the voice you silenced for years, now speaks with a clarity that feels both startling and inevitable. In this underworld, the archetype of the feminine lineage also reveals its presence. You may begin to sense that some of your deepest wounds did not originate with you. They were inherited, passed down through generations like an unwritten script. The fear of being too loud, too sexual, too ambitious, too emotional. The impulse to shrink so others might feel comfortable. The reflex to apologize for having needs. These patterns are not personal failures. They are echoes of the constraints placed on the women who came before you. Jung taught that the collective unconscious contains the experiences of the species stored as archetypal patterns. And in this moment, the transgenerational weight becomes palpable. Yet with the weight comes a realization. By confronting these patterns, you are not only healing yourself, you are participating in the unfinished psychological work of the lineage. Here something shifts again. A tenderness arises for the girl you once were, for her confusion, her vigilance, her desperate attempts to earn love by being less than she was. You see now that the masks you wore were not signs of inauthenticity, but strategies of survival. And the woman you are becoming bows inward to the child you once were, placing a hand on her shoulder. This inner gesture marks a turning point. The descent ceases to feel like punishment. It becomes pilgrimage. You begin to sense that beneath all the layers of conditioning, something unbreakable lives, something that has waited patiently for you to return. As you descend further, eros, the life force itself, stirs. Eros is more than sexuality. It is the connective, animating energy of the psyche, the impulse toward meaning, creativity, intimacy, and vitality. You may feel it as a sudden spark in your chest, a quickening in your breath, a renewal of curiosity or longing. After a long period of numbness or collapse, this awakening can feel almost dangerous, as though your own aliveness might consume you. But this is precisely the energy required for rebirth. The libido that was once trapped in maintaining the persona now begins to flow toward the self. You feel it in your body, a warmth returning to your skin, a sharper clarity in your senses, a sense of possibility emerging even in the shadows. The psyche is gathering its forces for ascent. It becomes clear now that the descent was not an ending, but a preparation. The confrontation with shadow lineage, father complex, and suppressed eros has broken the old internal structures. The old identity has loosened. The old contract of compliance has begun to dissolve. And beneath the rubble of what you once were, something more ancient and more authentic rises with quiet determination. The ego, humbled by its encounter with the depths, begins to realign itself with the self, the organizing center that has been guiding you from the beginning. You sense the shift before you understand it. A faint light appears in the darkness, not external, but internal. A warmth spreads through your chest, as if something long dormant is waking. For the first time in a long time, you feel the outline of who you might become, and you sense with a trembling certainty that the ascent is approaching. When the ascent begins, it does not announce itself with trumpets. Instead, it rises gently like dawn, leaking through the edges of a closed curtain. You may wake one morning and feel something impossibly subtle, yet unmistakably different, a quiet coherence, a soft but steady pulse of inner rightness. The world is the same. Your responsibilities, your relationships, your body are unchanged, and yet the air inside you feels clearer, lighter, as though some internal knot tied for years has loosened overnight. This is the first sign that the ego has begun to reorient itself around the deeper axis of the self. Jung described the self as the psychic center that holds the blueprint of your wholeness, the organizing principle that guides you toward becoming who you were meant to be. When the ego begins to align with the self, life acquires a new gravity, a center that does not move. At first, you may not know what to do with this clarity. It feels delicate, like the early flame of a candle that could be extinguished with one careless breath. You move slowly, almost reverently. You listen more closely to your body, recognizing that it has been speaking to you all along in the language of tension, fatigue, longing, and subtle expansion. You learn to sense when your chest tightens in the presence of someone who diminishes your truth, or when your breath deepens in the company of someone who nourishes your becoming. This embodied attunement is not a skill you acquire, but a remembering, a return to the instinctual wisdom that was numbed by years of performing a role. With each passing day, the clarity grows. You begin to recognize that you no longer tolerate certain patterns, conversations that drain you, relationships built on your self-erasure, obligations that require you to abandon your soul for the sake of harmony. What once felt like duty now feels like violation. What once felt like guilt now feels like information. This is the difference between living through the persona and living from the self. The persona asks, who do they need me to be? The self asks, who am I when no one is watching? And as this inner orientation strengthens, You may find yourself making decisions that surprise even you. You walk away from situations you once endured. You speak truths you once swallowed. You disappoint people you once bent yourself to please. And although a flicker of fear may arise, there is a deeper calm beneath it, a sense that your life is finally obeying its own laws. There may also be an unexpected solitude that accompanies this ascent, not the bleak isolation of abandonment, but a luminous loneliness and altitude of consciousness where fewer people can join you. Jung wrote that individuation inherently involves separation from the collective, because the individuated person can no longer betray their inner truth to remain part of the herd. This solitude is both ache and blessing. It asks you to stand in your own presence without distraction, to look into the mirror of your life and see someone you no longer have to negotiate with. It is here that you discover the quiet pleasure of your own company, the slow unfurling of a self that no longer needs to be diluted to be accepted. As you ascend further eros, the creative connective life force returns not as chaos but as a steady current of vitality. This energy fuels your clarity, your creativity, your boundaries, your intuition. You feel it in sudden surges of inspiration, in a renewed fascination with beauty, in a sharper sense of what resonates and what repels. Your desires no longer frighten you, they guide you. Your instincts no longer shame you, they protect you. You begin to understand that eros is not dangerous. When governed by the self, it is dangerous only when suppressed, twisted, or exiled. Now, as it flows freely, it becomes the very force that shapes your new life. The ascent slowly brings you to a place where you can look back on your old patterns with compassion rather than contempt. You see the years you spent seeking external validation not as weakness, but as the natural consequence of a psyche shaped by lineage and survival. You understand that the masks you wore were gifts that kept you safe until you were strong enough to remove them. And this insight softens you. It makes your inner truth radiant rather than rigid. It allows you to embrace your past selves as necessary chapters in the epic of your becoming. Finally, there comes a day, perhaps ordinary, perhaps tender, when the integration is unmistakable. You stand in front of a mirror, or step outside into the morning air, or simply sit alone in a quiet room and you feel it, a rootedness, a presence, a calm that is not dependent on anyone's approval. You feel the alignment of ego and self as a steady flame within your chest, and you know without needing to articulate it that you have crossed a threshold from which you cannot return. Not because you are trapped, but because you are no longer willing to abandon the woman you have reclaimed. You sense now that your transformation is not merely personal. Your return to yourself subtly shifts the collective field around you. Others feel it not through your words, but through the quiet authority of your being. You become a living symbol of permission, an embodied reminder that another way of living is possible. Women who have muted their voices for years may find themselves speaking more freely around you. People who once relied on your compliance may falter, sensing that the old dynamics no longer hold. The collective unconscious responds when a single individual aligns with the self, because such alignment has the power to ripple outward, altering the archetypal patterns of a culture that has long asked women to shrink. And in this recognition, you realize one final truth. The homecoming was never about becoming someone new. It was about remembering who you have always been beneath the noise, beneath the roles, beneath the silencing histories. The descent revealed your depths. The ascent restored your voice. And now, at the summit of this long inner journey, you stand as the woman your soul intended from the beginning, unmasked, undiminished, and undeniably whole. The deepest truth is this: the self is not something you find, it is something you finally stop fleeing. If this journey has resonated with you, consider joining this ongoing exploration of depth psychology, feminine consciousness, and Jungian transformation by liking, sharing, subscribing, and adding your reflections in the comments. Your voice enriches this collective field of awakening.